In August 2010, the lifeless body of 27-year-old Caroline Whitman was discovered in the master bedroom of her luxurious home in Willow Creek, Texas. The scene was both chaotic and chilling, with a bloodied champagne bottle lying next to her and signs of a violent struggle. What began as an apparent domestic tragedy soon unraveled into a sensational case, exposing the dark and twisted dynamics of Caroline's marriage to her husband, Michael Whitman. As investigators delved deeper, they uncovered a tangled web of betrayal, ambition, and unthinkable violence that had been brewing behind the facade of a perfect life. On the evening of August 14, 2010, the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, Texas, was shattered by the discovery of a horrifying crime. The 911 call came in at exactly 9:17 p.m. A neighbor, her voice trembling with fear, reported hearing a woman's blood-curdling screams coming from the Whitman residence, followed by a deafening silence. By the time the police arrived, the once pristine home had become the scene of an unspeakable tragedy. Inside the master bedroom, Caroline Whitman's lifeless body lay crumpled on the plush beige carpet, a grotesque contrast to the elegant decor of the room. Her face was bruised, her skull fractured, and the blood pooled beneath her head painted a grisly picture. Beside her, a champagne bottle, its sleek glass now smeared with her blood, lay abandoned, as if it had betrayed its celebratory purpose. The scene felt chaotic, yet deliberate, almost as if someone had tried to cover their tracks, but lacked the time or composure to do it convincingly. The Whitman home, with its manicured lawn and ivy-covered walls, was a symbol of wealth and aspiration, but tonight it stood as a silent witness to violence. The officers quickly secured the scene, ushering curious neighbors back to their homes. In the living room, a pair of wine glasses sat untouched on the coffee table, and the faint scent of freshly cut flowers lingered in the air. It was as if the house itself refused to acknowledge the horror that had unfolded within its walls. By August 16, 2010, the investigation was in full swing. Detectives assigned to the case began digging into the lives of Michael and Caroline Whitman. To the outside world, Michael was a shining example of success. He was a 30-year-old financial analyst who had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder. His focus unwavering, even in the face of his humble beginnings. Raised in a working-class neighborhood, he had built his life from scratch, earning admiration and envy in equal measure. Caroline, on the other hand, was the epitome of grace and charm. At 27, she had captivated Willow Creek's social elite with her beauty and ambition. Once an aspiring artist, she had given up her passion for painting to pursue a life of comfort and luxury. She met Michael at a charity gala 2 years prior, and their whirlwind romance quickly became the talk of the town. Their wedding, held in the spring of 2009, had been a grand affair, complete with chandeliers, a live orchestra, and a guest list that included some of Texas's most influential figures. It was a union celebrated as the perfect blend of love and ambition. But as investigators began piecing together the events leading up to the murder, cracks in the Whitmans' perfect facade became apparent. In the days following Caroline's death, detectives questioned Michael Whitman at his office. He maintained that he had been at a work dinner on the night of the murder, providing a list of colleagues who could verify his story. Yet, something about his demeanor gave the detectives pause. His answers, though calm and precise, lacked the emotional weight they expected from a grieving husband. As the investigation progressed, the team found themselves drawn to the darker corners of Michael and Caroline's lives. A search of their financial records revealed a pattern of large withdrawals from their joint account, amounts that far exceeded their known expenses. Caroline, it seemed, had been funneling money into a separate account under her name, a detail that Michael claimed he had only recently discovered. The detectives also uncovered a series of voicemails left by Michael on Caroline's phone. The tone of these messages ranged from desperate pleas for understanding to heated accusations. While Michael insisted that these were the result of normal marital disagreements, the detectives noted a tone of frustration and betrayal that hinted at something far more volatile. By August 25, 2010, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Evidence began to surface suggesting that Caroline's life was far more complex than anyone had realized. Investigators uncovered links between her and 3 men, each of whom had been involved with her in ways that Michael could not have known, or perhaps had chosen to ignore. These connections painted a picture of a woman who had grown restless in her marriage, seeking fulfillment beyond the boundaries of her vows. What stood out to the detectives was how meticulously Caroline had maintained her secrets. She had woven a web of deception that extended far beyond her husband. Friends who had once described her as charming and attentive now spoke of a subtle distance she had cultivated in recent months. Caroline, they said, was always careful, always composed, as if she were carrying the weight of something she dared not share. The more the investigators uncovered, the more they questioned the stability of the Whitman marriage. To those who knew them casually, Michael and Caroline seemed like the perfect couple. But to those closer to the couple, there were whispers of financial strain, of emotional disconnect, of quiet arguments that never seemed to fully resolve. The tragedy of August 14th had turned the Whitman home into a crime scene, and the idyllic image of their life was now irrevocably shattered. Every new discovery brought detectives closer to the truth, but it also deepened the mystery surrounding what had truly happened that night. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, one thing became clear. The lives of Michael and Caroline Whitman were far more tangled than anyone could have imagined. Caroline Whitman was never the simple woman she appeared to be. Beneath her polished smile and graceful demeanor lay an ambition so sharp it could cut through steel. In her early 20s, she was a struggling artist, painting abstract pieces in a cramped studio apartment. Her days were long, and her nights were spent dreaming of something bigger, something grander. She had grown tired of scrimping and saving, of living paycheck to paycheck, and of constantly being overlooked by the very world she wanted to charm. It was during this time that she met Michael Whitman at an art exhibit in downtown Austin. He was everything she had longed for: successful, determined, and humble, in a way that made him easy to admire. Michael, with his unassuming charm, was captivated by Caroline from the moment they met. Her wit and confidence were intoxicating, and her beauty seemed effortless. He fell hard and fast, swept up in the whirlwind of their connection. Michael saw Caroline as his equal, someone who had struggled but persevered. She painted a picture of herself as a woman who had fought against the odds, but he never realized just how calculated that picture was. For Caroline, Michael represented security and an escape from the life she had come to despise. When he proposed after just 9 months of dating, she accepted without hesitation, determined to make his world her own. The first year of their marriage, celebrated with candlelit dinners and weekend getaways, felt like a dream. Caroline reveled in the comforts Michael provided, while Michael found joy in making her happy. He worked tirelessly, often pulling late hours at the office, believing his hard work was securing their future. But as time passed, the cracks began to show. Caroline's desire for luxury outpaced Michael's earnings. The designer dresses, exclusive club memberships, and extravagant parties became a strain on their finances. By the summer of 2009, Michael started noticing discrepancies in their joint account. At first, he dismissed them as mistakes, perhaps a forgotten purchase or an accidental charge. But the amounts grew larger, and the explanations Caroline offered seemed too rehearsed. Michael, trusting to a fault, convinced himself it was nothing worth confronting her about. What Michael didn't know was that Caroline had quietly found other means to maintain her lavish lifestyle. During one of her many social outings, she caught the attention of Ethan Hargrave, a wealthy real estate mogul nearly 20 years her senior. Ethan was married and discreet, the perfect benefactor for someone like Caroline. Their affair began innocently enough, a dinner here, a gift there, but it quickly evolved into a transactional relationship. Caroline knew exactly how to play her cards, presenting herself as the grateful recipient of Ethan's generosity, while keeping her personal life firmly off limits. Caroline's web of deceit didn't stop there. Through a friend, she was introduced to Daniel Suarez, a renowned surgeon whose work earned him accolades and an impressive bank account. Daniel, smitten by Caroline's charm and beauty, became another player in her carefully orchestrated life. Unlike Ethan, Daniel was more emotionally invested, even speaking of leaving his wife to be with Caroline. She let him believe in that possibility, dangling the hope of a future together, as long as his gifts kept coming. The most complex of her relationships, however, was with Liam O'Connor, her former art dealer. Liam had once believed in Caroline's artistic potential and had championed her work. But when her career stalled, their professional relationship turned personal. Liam was not as wealthy as Ethan or Daniel, but his adoration for Caroline made him an easy target. By the spring of 2010, Caroline had become an expert at keeping her affairs separate from her marriage. She juggled the 3 men and her husband with the skill of a seasoned performer, careful to ensure their lives never intersected. But the double life she was living was beginning to take its toll. It all unraveled on August the 10th, 2010, when Michael, while updating his phone software, stumbled upon a series of explicit messages Caroline had exchanged with Ethan. The discovery was like a punch to the gut. In that moment, the woman he had idolized and sacrificed for was unrecognizable to him. The messages revealed not only her betrayal, but also the lengths she had gone to keep him in the dark. Michael didn't confront her immediately. He spent the next few days in a state of disbelief, piecing together the fragments of their life and realizing how blind he had been. On August 14th, 2010, he finally decided he couldn't stay silent any longer. That night, as Caroline prepared for what she told him was a charity gala, he waited for her in the living room. The confrontation was heated. Michael demanded answers, his voice sharp with pain and anger. Caroline, caught off guard, tried to deflect, accusing him of invading her privacy and twisting the truth. The argument escalated as Michael revealed he knew about Ethan, and then about Daniel and Liam. Caroline's composure broke, her voice rising as she lashed out at Michael, blaming him for not providing the life she deserved. The fight moved to the bedroom, where the intensity reached a boiling point. Fueled by betrayal, humiliation, and an overwhelming sense of loss, Michael grabbed the champagne bottle from the dresser, a symbol of their first anniversary, and lashed out in a moment of blind rage. The blow was swift and final, the room falling into a deafening silence as Caroline crumpled to the floor. The realization of what he had done hit Michael like a tidal wave. Panic set in, and he began moving frantically through the house. He attempted to stage the scene, wiping surfaces and rearranging items, but his hands trembled too much to make it convincing. The blood on the bottle, his fingerprints, and the chaotic state of the room would later betray his efforts. By the time Michael left the house that night, the life he had built was already in ruins. By September 10, 2010, the arrest of Michael Whitman for the murder of his wife, Carolyn, had become the talk of Willow Creek. The town, once enamored by the glamorous couple, now buzzed with speculation and whispered rumors. News vans crowded the streets, reporters eager to uncover every salacious detail of the case. Michael, handcuffed and escorted out of his home, maintained a stoic expression as flashing cameras captured his fall from grace. The image of the successful financial analyst turned murder suspect was plastered across every newspaper and screen. The trial began on November 15, 2010, in a packed courtroom. The prosecution wasted no time painting Michael as a man consumed by jealousy, greed, and a need for control. They described his actions on the night of August 14th as premeditated, pointing to the financial strain in their marriage and his discovery of Caroline's affairs as a motive. To bolster their case, the prosecution presented forensic evidence: Michael's fingerprints on the champagne bottle, traces of Caroline's blood on his clothing, and his haphazard attempt to stage the scene. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the prosecution called Caroline's lovers to the stand. Ethan Hargrave was the first to testify. His presence was commanding, his tailored suit and measured demeanor reflecting the power he wielded as a real estate mogul. Ethan admitted to the affair, but claimed it was purely physical, insisting he had no knowledge of Caroline's financial troubles or the tension in her marriage. His testimony revealed the calculated nature of Caroline's double life, as well as her ability to manipulate even those in positions of power. Next came Daniel Suarez, the high-profile surgeon who had been infatuated with Caroline. Daniel's testimony was raw and emotional. He recounted how Caroline had confided in him about feeling trapped in her marriage, and how he had genuinely believed they might have a future together. His words painted a picture of a woman who thrived on attention and knew exactly how to extract what she needed from those around her. Finally, Liam O'Connor took the stand. The art dealer, once a mentor to Caroline, seemed visibly uncomfortable under the scrutiny of the court. His testimony revealed the emotional complexity of their relationship, describing how Caroline had used her past struggles as an artist to draw him closer. While Liam's involvement was less overtly transactional than the others, it underscored Caroline's pattern of cultivating relationships to suit her needs. Each man's testimony added a layer to the portrait of Caroline, a woman who had charmed and deceived her way through life, leaving a trail of fractured relationships in her wake. But while their revelations shifted some blame onto Caroline, they also highlighted Michael's inability to confront the truth until it was too late. The defense, led by an experienced attorney with a reputation for handling high-stakes cases, took a different approach. They argued that Michael had been a victim of emotional and psychological abuse, driven to the brink by Caroline's betrayals and manipulation. The defense painted Caroline as a woman who had systematically eroded Michael's sense of self, using his love and devotion to her advantage. To support their case, the defense presented text messages and voicemails that revealed the escalating tension between Michael and Caroline in the weeks leading up to the murder. One particularly damning voicemail, recorded just days before her death, captured Caroline mocking Michael's financial struggles and threatening to leave him for someone who could provide more. The recording, played in court, sent a ripple through the courtroom. It was a moment that humanized Michael, casting him not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a man pushed to his breaking point. By November 22, 2010, the trial had reached its emotional peak. The defense called Michael to the stand, a move that surprised many. For the first time, the court heard directly from him. Michael spoke of his love for Caroline, describing how he had worked tirelessly to give her the life she wanted. He admitted to the murder, but framed it as a moment of madness, a culmination of years of betrayal, humiliation, and emotional exhaustion. His voice broke as he described the crushing realization of her affairs and the financial deception that had left him feeling like a pawn in her game. The prosecution, however, was unrelenting. They seized on Michael's admission, arguing that his actions were not those of a man driven to insanity, but of someone who had methodically planned his revenge. They pointed to the champagne bottle, a symbol of their marriage, as a deliberate choice of weapon, a macabre representation of Michael's desire to destroy the very foundation of their relationship. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Michael, in a rare break from his composed demeanor, uttered the words that would define the case. "Love makes you do unspeakable things." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of his statement hanging in the air. Outside the courthouse, public opinion was sharply divided. Some viewed Michael as a victim, a man broken by the weight of his wife's lies. Others saw him as a calculating murderer who had allowed his pride and anger to consume him. The media fed on the polarization, turning the trial into a spectacle that captivated the nation. As the trial drew to a close, the jury was left to grapple with a complex question. Was Michael a victim of circumstance, or was he fully responsible for the choices that led to Caroline's death? The answer would determine not only his fate, but also how this tragic story would be remembered. By November 24th, 2010, the courtroom was heavy with tension as the jury delivered their verdict. Michael Whitman sat motionless, his face a mask of resignation. The words "guilty of second-degree murder" echoed through the room, cutting through the hushed murmurs of the spectators. It was the conclusion to a trial that had gripped not just Willow Creek, but the nation. Michael's sentencing, 25 years in prison without parole, was swift and decisive. As the judge handed down the sentence, the room's emotions swirled. Michael's mother wept quietly in the back row, clutching a photograph of her son from better days. Caroline's relatives sat stone-faced, their grief mingled with the bitter satisfaction of seeing justice served. Outside the courthouse, reporters scrambled to broadcast the verdict, their voices rising above the din of a crowd that had gathered for one final glimpse of the man whose life had unraveled so spectacularly. Public opinion, however, was far from unanimous. To some, Michael was a tragic figure, a man who had given everything to a woman who deceived and manipulated him until he snapped. To others, he was a murderer who had taken a life in cold blood, regardless of the circumstances. The media latched onto this divide, turning the case into a modern morality tale. Headlines painted Caroline as a femme fatale, whose tangled web of affairs had ultimately led to her demise. The details of her betrayals, exposed during the trial, became the subject of countless debates. Was she a victim of her own ambitions, or a master manipulator who pushed Michael to his breaking point? In the days following the verdict, the community of Willow Creek was left to grapple with the aftermath. The Whitman home, once a symbol of success and romance, now stood abandoned. Neighbors avoided the property, their gazes lingering on its manicured lawn, as if expecting to glimpse the ghosts of Michael and Caroline's turbulent marriage. For Michael, the adjustment to prison life was stark and unforgiving. Stripped of the comforts he had worked so hard to attain, he found himself confronting the full weight of his actions. Nights in his cell were the hardest. Alone with his thoughts, he replayed the events of August 14th, 2010, over and over again. He thought about the champagne bottle, a gift meant to celebrate love and commitment, and how it had become a weapon of destruction. Michael wrestled with a deep, gnawing regret. He had loved Caroline in a way that consumed him, but that love had also blinded him. As he sat in the dim light of his cell, he couldn't help but reflect on how his devotion had turned into obsession, how her betrayal had ignited a rage he hadn't known he was capable of. Caroline, despite her flaws, was a constant presence in his mind. He remembered the way she laughed, the way she filled a room with her energy, and the way she had once looked at him with what he believed was genuine affection. But those memories were now tainted by the knowledge of her deceit. Michael couldn't shake the image of the explicit messages he had found on her phone, the mocking tone of her voicemails, and the realization that she had used him as a means to an end. The public's fascination with the case lingered long after the trial. True crime enthusiasts dissected every detail, from the forensic evidence to the emotional testimony of Caroline's lovers. Documentaries were produced, books were written, and podcasts debated the deeper questions raised by the case. What drove Caroline to betray the man who gave her everything? How did Michael's idyllic life descend into murder? For many, the story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the destructive power of love. Michael's life in prison was a stark contrast to the life he had once envisioned. The letters he received were a constant reminder of the world he had left behind, some from strangers who sympathized with his plight, others from those who condemned him as a monster. As the years passed, Michael began to find a semblance of peace in his solitude. He took to journaling, documenting the events that led to his downfall, hoping that in understanding his actions, he might find some measure of redemption. But the questions that haunted him remained unanswered. Could he have saved his marriage if he had confronted Caroline sooner? Was there a version of their story that didn't end in tragedy? In the end, Michael accepted that the answers to those questions would forever elude him. The love he had once felt for Caroline, a love so powerful it had driven him to the edge, had left a scar that time could never erase. Her memory lingered, not as the woman he had once adored, but as a symbol of the choices and circumstances that had forever changed his life. Caroline's legacy, too, remained complicated. To some, she was a victim of her own desires, a woman who dared to reach too high and paid the ultimate price. To others, she was a cautionary figure, her manipulations a reminder of the dark truths that can lie beneath a glamorous facade. As Michael gazed through the bars of his cell, the weight of his reflections bore down on him. His life was a testament to the devastating consequences of love, betrayal, and revenge. And though the world outside moved on, the echoes of that fateful night in August 2010 continued to reverberate within him, a haunting reminder of the price of passion turned deadly. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on more shocking stories, and be sure to check out another gripping case. The bagel shop owner in New York, murdered by his jealous ex-wife after starting a new relationship. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.